The reason I wanted this group to stick around is to hear this additional message. There are two kinds of sexual harassment. We talked about the first one, hostile work environment. This is where the individual is liable. The individual can lose his or her house, his or her car, his or her bank account. The other kind of sexual harassment is called quid pro quo. For the attorneys in the room who speak Latin, it means this for that. And it can only happen when you have a superior-subordinate relationship, okay? Where the superior person is using his or her position or title or money or power to solicit sexual favors from the subordinate, make promises to the subordinate, threaten the subordinate. That's called quid pro quo. And the way the courts view this is the company is liable. Why? Because everybody in this room is what's considered an agent. You have this title. It's a legal term. You are an agent of the company. So if you're engaging in this kind of behavior, the company is on the hook. Could you be sued personally for hostile work environment? Yeah, you could. But if I'm the attorney and I have a choice, am I going to go after you, who may not have, two nickels to rub together, or am I going to go after the company with deep pockets? Guess what? They're coming after the company. So what's important to remember is that this quid pro quo situation doesn't only happen at work. If the manager is soliciting sex from the secretary at work, I know that's a stereotypical scenario, but you know what I'm talking about. That's quid pro quo. But let's say that the manager runs into the secretary in the grocery store or the club or the restaurant and solicits sex from her there. It's still quid pro quo because the relationship hasn't changed. The boss is still the boss, yes? So when it comes to your interaction with coworkers, you just are being held to a higher standard, sorry. You got to be on your best behavior as you interact with coworkers because you are an agent of the company. This is the slide I did not want everyone to see because I didn't want to put ideas into people's heads. This is a partial list of sexual harassment lawsuits that have been lost by companies. Sacramento Mercy Hospital had one of these godlike surgeons that was making all the money for the hospital, but who happened to be a pig, and he was harassing the nurses. One of the nurses had enough. She goes to the hospital administrator, lodges a complaint. Instead of doing something with him, they fired her. She didn't think that was very good, so she hires an attorney. It goes to a jury trial. Jury came back with a $168 million award for her. So hopefully the hospital learned its lesson. Hopefully we can all learn a lesson that says, if somebody comes to you with a complaint, you better drop everything. You better pay attention to what's going on and you better do the right thing. Last slide. Remember that you are an agent of the company. So if you know about something that's going on, it's no different than Brian or Brent knowing. So here is a scenario that if it hasn't happened to you yet, it will. Somebody's going to come into your office one day and say, Pete, I don't want you to do anything with this, but I just got to talk to somebody. Whatever you do, don't make any promises, because you may learn something that must be escalated, right? And my experience says that even though the person says, I don't want you to do anything with it, they really do. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in your office. They want something to happen. So it doesn't take much to convince them to tell their story. You're supportive. Thanks for having the guts to come in and do this. I know it's hard. I got your back. Let's figure this out. Those kind of reassuring comments, right? So now the person is going to tell you their story. And they'll do it in one of two ways. They're either going to give you a written statement, which we love, or they're going to start to verbally tell you their story. Whatever you do, don't stop them. Don't send them back to their desk to type up a statement. They might lose their nerve, right? They might change their mind. You've got them, they're talking, take notes. When they're done, you repeat the notes back to them. You make sure you've captured everything. Maybe you have them sign it. Well, there's your statement. As this person is about to leave your office now, put a muzzle on them. Because remember, one of the definitions of sexual harassment, spreading stories of a sexual nature, right? So if Christine goes out of the office and starts telling people what Todd did to her, I'm now the injured party. She's now harassing me. That's not what we want. So we tell Christine, listen, you got to talk to somebody. I get it. Talk to a family member, church leader, therapist, but don't talk to your coworkers. Now, one of the things that a good investigator might do, though, is to say, Christine, have you talked to anybody else here at work about this? Before you came into me, have you talked about this with anybody? Who was it? Because I need to go put a muzzle on them and stop this thing. Some of us have worked in environments where one of these stories gets started in the morning, and by lunchtime, wildfire, and it's out of control. So we have to control it. We have to contain it as best we can. After Christine leaves your office, you're making a beeline for Brent's office or picking up the phone and saying, I don't want this. Here's this mess. You deal with it, because they are messy. They're awful. And then lastly, and by the way, let Brent conduct the investigation. He will pull in the appropriate people at the appropriate time, and we'll do it the right way. The last thing you should do is avoid the temptation of going back to your office and calling somebody in the room here and saying, you're not going to believe what I heard today. Because if you do that, you're spreading stories of a sexual nature about a coworker. You're now harassing me. So I cannot emphasize enough how delicately we have to handle sexual harassment cases. You are going to be in positions of learning and hearing privileged information because of the nature of what you do. You've got to be mature about it. You now have a roadmap to follow. Please stick to it.